Today, we are going to be talking about a filmmaker known for his disturbing, violent films, who is adamantly against almost every other film containing violence that you have ever watched. So, like Schindler's List, he hates it, he finds it immoral. Tarantino's films, don't even think about them. His philosophy behind his movies is that it's something that many may find appealing, but others may find it a bit hypocritical. You may have heard of Michael Haneke. He has won the Palme d'Or in Cannes for Amour and the White Ribbon, and he has received Oscar nominations for them in the foreign language category. While in others, you may have seen some of the best actresses alive, like Isabelle Huppert or Juliette Binoche. They have their leading roles there. So today we are going to be taking a deep dive into his philosophy about film and about violence, and trying to understand his views on morality and on entertainment. We personally like him very much. We really respect him. We find his thoughts to be fascinating, but we still think that there are some contradictions in his ideas and the way that his films are, which is why we wanted to share these conversations with the public to see what your guys' opinions are as well. So it is not necessary for you to have watched his films for you to understand his philosophy or for you to understand this video, which we will explain in detail his philosophy here. But if you have watched his movies, of course it's a plus, because you can add more to the conversation. And I think actually everyone can add their thoughts to the conversation here, because everyone has thoughts about violence and everyone has strong feelings about violence in video games, true crime, or just about violence in general. So I think all those thoughts can further develop these arguments.
So everywhere we look, violence is always being sensationalized, or at least that's how he reads it, right? Like in movies, especially action and horror films in the late 80s and early 90s, which is probably the time where he consumed the most films. In the news media, in true crime podcasts, especially with this new true crime wave we're having, he sees it everywhere. So some of the most obvious cases make most of us feel like, well, there's something wrong with consuming this type of content. But like, can you really say you have ever watched a violent film where violence is not being sensationalized? It's always gonna be, at least in the eye of some beholder. There's this interview he has for the Hollywood Reporter, in which he talks about how much he hates Spielberg's work, especially like Spielberg's historical pieces and epics, for instance, like Schindler's List. That's a specific example he gives, because he's someone who's always trying to make the audience entertained, right? Like he appeals to mass general public, and he tries to make his films as comfortable for as many people as possible, which is like the blockbuster mentality. Makes sense for him. And Haneke gives this example of Spielberg creating suspense in this movie, in which he tells a story about the Holocaust, and he uses like dramatic devices to try to get us engaged with whatever is happening, and try to position us in the place of the Jew that is being part of the Holocaust. And the fact that he uses some of linguistics or like visual language to try to make this scene more enhanced is directly against Haneke's philosophy in this sense, right? Because using cinematic conventions to hook and entertain the viewer and make them excited about something that is actually the real life experience of someone. His films, in a way, are always trying to make the other individual that is consuming the film just like get this emotion for the thrill of the excitement of the piece, and then not even like engage with the actual human topics or the complexity of situations like these, right?
Là, j'ai encore les jambes qui tremblent et ça fait très très bizarre à voir.
Extraordinaire, surprenant, éprouvant, fatigant, mais merveilleux.
C'est insoutenable et ça rappelle de mauvais souvenirs.
Une montée du nazisme raffiné.
Vous avez aimé?
Pas du tout. Le premier film intelligent qu'on voit cette année, dans la sélection officielle.
Les gens qui sont sortis, bon, on ne peut pas sortir, on est coincés sur... Ça m'a fait penser un peu à Orange Mécanique 97. Hein.
Très immoral, parce que les méchants sont pas punis, donc c'est pas trop... Je suis un peu déçu.
So, clearly, after watching these videos, the reaction of the public, his films are about violence and they are disturbing. He just thinks that he's the one who is portraying violence correctly, right?
But the question that Haneke presents then is there really any way in which we can depict violence without glorifying it or without being giving it some entertainment value for the viewer? This is what he publicly claims he does, but the question that we're posing is, does he actually get to achieve that? Or is he also like committing the same sins that Spielberg is committing and he himself criticizes?
Tell us how he tries to avoid entertaining viewers with his violent films in terms of the form.
He tries to be as objective as possible in showing the disturbing scenarios in his stories. Like, he uses long, static shots and does not try to manipulate the spectator's feelings as much or the speed of time to try to like create a narrative. He's in a way trying to hide the violent act per se and just focuses on the emotion of the actor's facial expressions to try to really ham the point of the aftermath of violence more so than the act of violence. He's also refusing always to give the audience the pleasure of what we usually would call catharsis or some resolution or climatic moment. So many of his films tend to end abruptly or ambiguously. His films are indeed filled with violence, but in a way I think he's hoping that as opposed to watching a Spielberg film, he really does not want you to enjoy the experience of watching his films and the violence in it.
Yes. Yes, I think that it's crazy that he literally says that he wants us to look away. He wants his movies to be unbearable to you. I think the biggest praise for him would be for us to just turn off our TVs while we're watching his movies because we just cannot stand the watching them, right?
Zur Isabel gesagt, ich weiß jetzt nicht mehr bei welcher Szene, sondern ideal wäre, wenn die Szene so ist, dass die Leute wegschauen, weil sie es nicht aushalten. Ne? Und das stimmt natürlich. Also das kann man ja nicht den ganzen Film durchhalten, aber es gibt einfach, wenn man der Wahrheit einer Situation nahe kommen will, kann sie so intensiv sein, dass man es nicht aushält. Ne? Also es wäre schon, wenn es eine schlimme Situation gibt, dass man die so zeigen kann oder auch nicht zeigen kann, aber das ist für den Zuschauer schwer erträglich ist, weil dann geht es halt tiefer als übers Konsumieren hinaus. Nicht? Weil das Konsumieren hat auch seine Funktion, also ich schaue mir irgendwas an, wenn das gut gemacht ist und amüsant ist, konsumiere ich gern was den ganzen Abend. Aber hängt immer davon ab, welches Sujet ich behandle. Ne? Es gibt halt, wenn man sich problematischeren Dingen zuwendet, dann muss man sie auch in ihrer Problematik versuchen auszuloten. Ne?
Right. If you think about it, many filmmakers are seeking to generate pleasant emotions so that the audience that watches the film would watch the movie until the end, right? Like it's the go-to. Even if the conflict seems like too much, we keep tuning into the next episode or like the next movie to hope that we will get some catharsis or resolution about what we're watching, so that the ending point of our experience, like the final period, will be pleasurable, right? This filmmaker, no matter what the subject matter, they want you to have like a good time, right? And provide entertainment before like an artistic thesis or something. He does not want to manipulate your emotions in principle. Like, he says filmmakers should make their dramatic tricks visible when they're portraying violence, so that you're always like kind of aware that you're consuming a film, right? For instance, in Funny Games, when you think the protagonist is about to save themselves from the torturers, they get a remote control and they turn back and rewind the movie to just before that happens, and then you actually get to not see it play out as if we would have that cathartic moment. Man, it's a big F to the audience. No, he's telling us, you see, there's literally no way out of this situation. You might have liked the device, you might have felt excited, but it won't use it just because you would like it, right? But he's showing you that that's the moment which you would have liked. He shows you your reaction and then he takes it away from you. You're supposed to have a terrible time with this film. He says, you should not lie with images or manipulate, for that matter. I think you should make visible the dramatic tricks that he uses, which he indeed does.
He does, yes. I also want to make a quick pause here about dramatic conventions and being irresponsible, which was a huge shock to me, and I think that for many other people who have studied film or literature or whatever. I think that me being a literature major, I and all my peers, we obsess when like studying narrative and studying conventions. I don't really want to say like studying rules, because they aren't really rules, but more like principles or conventions or suggestions on what makes a story addictive or what makes a story coherent. So we study all these conventions obsessively for many years. We consume fiction. We love fiction, both consuming it and writing it. So a lot of like the years of my life have been centered around studying conventions, and then I see filmmakers that subvert conventions and subvert expectations, and I think that's crazy, and I think that's cool. But then Haneke comes in, and then he's like, he takes it to the next level. He's not just someone who's gonna subvert a convention just like any other like cool weird filmmaker would do. He just straight up says like, no, it's wrong that you're using them. Like, they are immoral, they are irresponsible. Like, if you're gonna use a convention, you have to make them visible, which is what he does with a remote control, for example.
Das hättest du nicht tun sollen, Anna. Die Spielregel bricht man nicht.
So it is crazy, when someone comes over and says like, hey, what you've been doing for so many years is wrong, and I think that your whole identity may be centered around, studying fiction, studying conventions. If you're someone who, like, this is your major, this is your job, this is your career, and then someone comes in and it's like, no, what you're doing is wrong. It's like you're going to someone who has been, selling or manufacturing plastic products for their entire life, and then suddenly you find out that plastic is harmful, which is obviously, it's a very bold comparison, but for Haneke it would kind of be the same, because for him it's like you're making a lot of harm to society when you're using these conventions and you're making society enjoy violence. We are actually harming society, which is something that he says. I don't know if I fully agree with everything. I don't know what everyone else thinks. Like, you all can let us know in the comments, but that's the way that he sees it. For him, it's about morality, and he doesn't just hate how conventions manipulate you. He also says that artists should not tell you what to think. So he says, for example, an artist doesn't give answers but asks good questions. He says that's what serious literature does in a BFI interview. So he doesn't tell you what to think, unlike other directors that he criticizes. So he shows you situations without manipulating them, like you said, or at least not as much as other directors do, because it's probably impossible really to do a movie and not manipulate absolutely any situation that you're showing. But he wants us to just see a situation the way that it is and ask yourself, why is this happening? Why am I okay watching a Tarantino film, a Marvel film, for example?
Also ich muss eine Geschichte so erzählen, dass sie um jeden Preis anders ist wie eine Mainstream-Dramaturgie, sondern die Geschichte, die ich erzählen will, handelt von Themen oder Problemen, bei denen es eine Lüge wäre, vorzugeben, man wüsste Antworten. Auch die großen Probleme, die die Menschheit bewegen, darauf gab es leider noch nie Antworten, sonst wären die Dinge schon gelöst. Es lebt nur das Mainstream-Kino von der frommen Lüge, dass sie lösbar sind. Und das ist, wenn man Film als Ware ansieht und als Konsumprodukt, ist es auch in Ordnung, weil die Leute zahlen ja dafür, dass sie wieder beruhigt nach Hause gehen können. Ich glaube, dass Kunst nicht die Aufgabe hat, die Leute zu beruhigen, sondern und auch nicht die Aufgabe hat, Antworten zu geben auf die Fragen, sondern die Fragen so zu stellen, dass jeder selber sich angeregt fühlt, sich mit den Problemen auseinanderzusetzen. Das macht ja die Literatur auch, die ernsthafte Literatur.
So I think a good question is, why do we watch his movies till the end? And some of us even rewatch his movies. I am guilty of rewatching a couple of them. If we know that we are not going to get any kind of catharsis, if he wants us to look away, and I know that he wants me to look away. Me personally, I don't know about you, I don't know about the people watching this. I just watch them as an exercise, like as a thought experiment, because I know what he thinks, I know what his philosophy is like. So it's more like a thought experiment for me, but not because I enjoy the experience, you know.
Yeah, also like about his dislike of the dramatic tricks that he mentions, he does use devices to create alienation, for instance. So the complete opposite of being lured into the movie and its messages, he wants us to create a sort of distance between us and the movie. Let's go back to when they were rewinding that moment in Funny Games, when the protagonist had a chance to save herself, right? He's telling us in our face, basically, you would have liked this to happen, right? This is the usual feeling you get in these kinds of movies.
Die Regeln, die der Thriller normalerweise hat, nämlich Tieren und Kindern darf nichts passieren, das Unrecht muss am Schluss gerächt werden, all diese Regeln zu brechen, auch das dient dazu, sozusagen den Zuschauer vor Augen zu führen, was seine Erwartungen eigentlich normalerweise eben sind. Seine Erwartungen im Thriller sind es, über die Realität betrogen zu werden. In Wirklichkeit wird meistens das Unrecht nicht gerächt. Und in Wirklichkeit sterben die Kinder und sterben die Tiere. Verantwortlich oder unverantwortlich kann man überall sein. Die Frage ist, wem gegenüber verantwortlich? Dem Medium als Kunstform gegenüber oder dem Geschäft gegenüber? Ich glaube, 98% der Filmemacher fühlen sich dem Geschäft gegenüber verantwortlich. Das ist das, was ich als obszön bezeichnen würde.
It's interesting here that he feels he is responsible to art. I thought he was probably going to say that he was responsible to humanity or to morality or to peace. But we will be back on this topic in some minutes.
Meine ganzen Filme sind überhaupt nur denkbar als Reaktion auf das zeitgenössische Kino, also das, was halt heute das Kino, das die Säle füllt, also das die großen Zuschauerzahlen hat. Dagegen polemisieren alle meine Filme inhaltlich und formal. Und das ist auch sozusagen meine Position, in die ich im Allgemeinen eingeordnet werde, gegen die ich aber nichts habe, weil ich mich dort auch wohlfühle. Also ich möchte mich nicht in diesen Zerstreuungsbereich vereinnahmen lassen. Ich bin ein völlig fantasiearmer Mensch. Ich kann mir eigentlich nur, ich kann gut Verbindungen knüpfen, ja? Aber ich bin absolut angewiesen auf das Konkrete. Es trifft mich auch als Zuschauer nur etwas, was ich konkret wiedererkennen kann. Und das entsteht nicht über Fantasie, sondern das entsteht über die genaue Betrachtung der Wirklichkeit und über den Versuch, dann diese Einzelbetrachtungen eben zu organisieren und zu einem Ganzen zu machen, das auch packt und das auch real ist.
So it's both, I would say his movies are both a reaction of the blockbuster movies, but also real life violence that he thinks, like we have to talk about this because violence is something, you know, that is real and it's horrible, you know.
However, some people find Haneke's philosophy a bit hypocritical. Is it really possible to not glorify violence when you're elevating it to art? Why not just write an essay about it instead of a work of art? Is he just being naive? As there will always be people that no matter how we present it will always find pleasure in violence. Of course I'm talking about sadists or gore fans, those sort. Wouldn't it be more under his philosophy to only make pacifist, light-hearted films where if violence had ever happened to characters, it happened before the film started? Just look at the growing community of people on the dark web who buy gore, like real gore videos, and even if he sometimes tries to hide the violent act from the camera and you just listen to the cries or you just focus on the facial expressions or in the aftermath, can those aspects of violence also be exciting for different people?
Yeah, I guess so.
Don't you think that the fact that his movies always contain violence in some form or another show that violence is in fact very interesting to him?
Yes, I think violence is interesting to him. I think he maybe thinks that violence must be the most interesting topic in that it must always be discussed and it must always be in our interests from an ethical standpoint. As in, it should always be in our minds. We always have to be thinking about it, talking about it, and wondering why these things happen, why people commit violent acts. why a person can get to the point of doing something horrible, right? In his interview with Felix von Boehm, he says that he quotes Goethe in a quote that says that there's no crime that I can think of which I could have not committed myself.
Er hat gesagt, es gibt kein Verbrechen, das ich mir nicht vorstellen könnte, selber begangen zu haben. Und das war ein kluger Satz. Man muss nur in die richtige Situation kommen. Ne? Es ist immer, glaube ich, sehr naiv zu sagen, wenn man über andere spricht, was die da getan haben. Man war nicht in der Situation. Ja? Ich könnte auch nicht für mich meine Hand ins Feuer legen, dass ich in bestimmten Momenten nicht Dinge tue, für die ich mich unter anderen Umständen zu Tode schämen würde. Ne? Das ist, glaube ich, jedermanns Schicksal. Er muss nur so an diese Grenzen mal gestoßen werden. Dann erweist es sich, wie weit es her ist mit seiner Humanität.
So I think he's worried here that the right or the wrong situation and the wrong motivation can make any of us commit horrible acts. So we cannot just ignore violence, like would be the case of making a pacifist film where nothing bad happens. So by watching his movies, we should realize that we are complicit in a culture of violent entertainment, which normalizes or even glorifies violence, right? What do you think?
For example, the children in the White Ribbon, who will grow up to be Nazis, none of them was a psychopath. None of them are shown killing or torturing animals or showing a severe lack of empathy. They were all ordinary children that were brainwashed.
Yes, that's scary. That's scary. And like he also says, like, it's scarier when it's the next door neighbor, the one that is aggressive, the one that's doing horrible things. Because if you are like, oh, it's a psychopath doing this horrible thing, psychopaths are rare. There aren't that many psychopaths. But if my next door neighbor could turn into a Nazi, like the case of the White Ribbon, or my next door neighbor could be a torturer, like in Funny Games, it's frightening. That is frightening. So Funny Games is very, very meta. It has a lot of quotes that people might consider on the nose about this topic. But a moment that I really, or that really killed me was when the family, the victims, they ask the torturers, why are you doing this? And this is what they reply.
Come on, he's a spoiled little brat. He's jaded and disgusted by the emptiness of existence.
And about the White Ribbon, he also said that we shouldn't reduce this film to this specific period and this specific country, right? So Germany before the war, when the future Nazis were still children. I've shown Jojo Rabbit to my teenage students before, who make a lot of jokes about Germans and all that. And I've always told them, like, it's not like the Germans have certain type of genes that make them more violent or more racist, you know. It's just that the adults have started indoctrinating them since they were kids, since they were your guys' age or even younger, is what I told them. And even giving them drugs to make them more aggressive, you know. So we have to be careful with propaganda and more like with the situations that can foster violence, right? This is what Haneke is talking about. So, for example, he says, because I'm scared that something will happen to me, I use violence against others. Because I'm unfamiliar with something, it scares me. And because it scares me, I want to push it away. And if it cannot be pushed away easily, I will push it away more violently. So, of course, this is pretty obvious when we're talking about, you know, the Nazis and in the way in which the propaganda showed, you know, Jews like demons, basically, right? So I'm scared of them and I'm unfamiliar with them and it scares me, and because it scares me I want to push it away, right? And I do so with violence. So yeah, basically he wants us to talk about violence because anyone could turn into a violent person. So yeah, that's why I think that it interests him. That's why I think that violence interests him. So I think that if he would only make pacifist films, he would be kind of turning a blind eye to the issue of violence. He wants us to discuss violence. He wants us to think about what to do about it to solve these issues. He doesn't want us to just ignore an aspect of society that he is very concerned about, right? What do you think?
Yes, rather than saying that violence interests him, I think it's more accurate to say that it worries him. Like he's concerned about the prevalence of violence in mass entertainment. I can say he does not derive pleasure out of it, but at the same time he derives so much unpleasure in real life violence that's why his main concern in his films is to try to, I don't know, get people to feel what he feels about violence. In an interview, he once said he saw a mother hit her son on a train, right? And despite it not being any of his business, he intervened. So he doesn't want to manipulate the audience, just to share his feelings authentically of what worries him. We see this in extreme situations depicted in his works, such as Amour, for instance, or Funny Games, where this concept is reduced to a story where the idea is laid bare. Like in Cachet, there's this scene where Juliette Binoche is trying to do some, I think, ironing, and there's this screaming outside of somebody being tortured or something, and she just turns up the TV volume to drown out the screams from the neighbors. So his work is, as you see, deeply humanistic, but he just really wants us to develop a more empathetic perspective towards other people. Bottom line.
Humanistic, yes, and passionate also. I like what a critic said in the Criterion collection. He said that no one makes The Seventh Continent or Funny Games or The White Ribbon or Amour unless they feel a moral imperative to do so. And he said that Haneke is like the most passionate contemporary filmmaker for this reason.
Yes, maybe. He also tries to expose other acts of violence that are not necessarily conceived as an act of violence, or more so like acts of passivity that perpetuate cycles of violence. This is very clear in his films like Cachet or The Seventh Continent, for instance. This is, in any case, I think the experiment of placing people, I mean the audience, in these uncomfortable positions is serving two purposes at the same time. Firstly, they reflect on his own attempt to make these uncomfortable questions for himself, right, as an artist, because the best questions are the uncomfortable ones. But in a second way, he's also representing an act of empathy, like he's sharing with us his discomfort with violence and the audience. He's fostering this deeper connection, or I mean empathy, right, to the real world in his films.
Yes, and he says in an interview, he said that he's very afraid of suffering, like always. That it's a fear that he cannot escape. That there's nothing that is more is scarier than being physically exposed to pain, or mentally, or not you, but watching someone you love being in pain. So he says that he thinks that it's everybody's greatest fear. And that fear is the driving force behind a lot of creative expression. Not only a fear of violence, but fear in general. He says that the great questions of humanity that literature and film sometimes address are the questions posed by fear, which is very interesting. But then there are certain things about him that make me go like, what? Like, for example, in this documentary, My Life, he says, I don't believe a work of art changes society or an individual. So like that really puzzles me, because it seems like his movies are a work of art that are an attempt to change people, right? What do you think?
Yeah, that makes absolutely no sense to whatever he's trying to do, right? I mean, if he does not believe in the transformative power of films through people or even to himself, I don't why is he even doing it, right? He's trying to share some peaceful message with the world, and if he doesn't believe it can aspire to anything, then this is just an act of vanity or a personal project. But cinema is such a collaborative art form and such a massive art form, which its own thing is to be consumed by as many people and have the wider reach. So if he's just making it as a thesis which he does not believe has any power to do anything, why is he even doing it, right?
Yeah, I guess this might be one of the things in which we find contradictions in him. So if anyone has any idea why he said this, let us know because we don't know. But yeah, he does have many critics that think that he's a bit hypocritical and everything. He has some actual haters that think that he sees the public, the general public, the one who the ones who go see the blockbusters and everything, that he kind of sees them as idiots or sadists who enjoy violence, Spielberg lovers, Marvel lovers, etc. I will have to disagree with those haters there. I don't think that's the case. I don't think he sees them that way. I think he knows that the general public, I think he knows that they are not idiots and sadists. He knows that they enjoy these violent films due to the conventions that these other blockbuster directors have used to make us enjoy these films, So I think that he is completely aware that if Tarantino or Spielberg or any Marvel filmmaker, whatever, shot their movies the way that Haneke does, with his form, they would probably hate those movies, right? They will probably hate Schindler's List or Inglourious Basterds, whatever, if they were shot with the form that Haneke shots them, with the long static shots and etc. So I think that's the point, right? Other critics see him as a misanthropist. I don't think that's the case, and he actually makes the case for not being a pessimist, for example. And this is one of the most fascinating things I've heard him say. He said that people sometimes thought of me as being a pessimist. I would say that pessimists are those who make films which make people more stupid because they think it's not worth talking about real things. It's a kind of cynicism, taking people's money out of their pockets just to appease them. I call that pessimism. Everybody who gets angry or annoyed, who is furious about injustices or whatever, can only be an optimist. Otherwise, they wouldn't even speak about these things. They would say, it's not worth it, so we won't do it.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting what you says about this consumer disjunctive that he has with the blockbuster cinema, and how he takes the whole culture of mass consumption as something that is completely nihilistic and meaningless. When in any case, even though he may be works of strong content or thematically disruptive, tonally aggressive, in the end, they're just as much more optimistic an act than simply wanting to put out content to just feel a grid, and can you just sell and get your royalties and earn your money, right? It's a little bit more of a conscious act, and it's so much about his own ego that I just want to be free in my art. Otherwise, no, I mean, generally, I think he wants to do something that somehow is adding to the world, or to whoever is gonna see it, to the cultural panorama of the artistic discipline of art or cinematic language, in this case cinema, right? But that's why it makes no sense when he says that he doesn't believe in the transformative power of cinema,
Right.
because he's such an optimist about these things, and he's trying to make people reflect on the killer of the week thing and commercial violence. Makes no sense.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And also, this quote about him not being a pessimist and others being pessimists, other filmmakers being pessimists, is especially interesting to me because his movies do seem pessimistic because there is no silver lining. And I see a lot of people saying, I cannot watch his movies because there's no hope. There's nothing, there's no silver lining to counterbalance the horrible situations and the horrible violence that we're seeing. So nothing. What do you think about that?
I would say that he offers no hope for his own characters. I even sometimes think he's very cruel to the characters he writes, because he exposes them to terrible things. I've heard of people who write and they grow these bonds with the characters they're writing. They give them personalities and backstories, and they just kind of get attached to the people on the page. And he's such a sadist to those people in his own films. But at the same time, I do kind of see him as a silver lining as Haneke inside the cinematic panorama of today, right? Because he does kind of put out some material that's telling you that there are different angles to understanding violence in film, and he actually advocates for all this against commercial cinema's oversaturation of violence, and for some type of humanistic cinema that's aspiring for you to reflect on the nature of violence. So in that way, he himself is the silver lining, although in his films you might not find any. Another thing I'm thinking about is, are these theses of his positions aligned with what he's actually accomplishing? That's the main thing we talked about too. Because if you think someone is watching a Haneke film to kind of confront themselves, that's not really Haneke's target audience, or at least the target audience he ends up having. Haneke's real audience might be mainly people who are looking for new ways to feel that feeling of mass consumption that has already oversaturated them with violence. Like regular violence does nothing for them. And then you get to somebody like Haneke, who's just offering new ways on how to understand these concepts and scale, right? But it's also offering new types of thrillers in which you get actually really, really profoundly scared. So it's like you've already seen serial killers kind of kill people 1,000 times. Have you already tired of the overexposure to that? And then Haneke is trying to criticize them, but he's presenting himself as an option too, where there is kind of a renewed interest in. And you say, how original, this gave me even more fear. I was traumatized watching this Haneke film. There are people who are actively looking for that. And not kind of in a sadist kind of way, but because they enjoy that voyeuristic sadist aspect of cinema, right? Because it's already oversaturated and the digestible content somehow is not enough anymore. So with Haneke, for some people, it can actually be even more exciting, which is definitely exactly the opposite of what he's trying to do, which is to invite you to this type of reflection.
Yes, I think that definitely there are things that we cannot avoid, such as sadists. Like, there will always be things out of our control. And about this, it's crazy that, for example, Salo, Pasolini's Salo, or 120 Days of Sodom, is one of his favorite movies ever. And I assume that because he sees Salo as having a similar philosophy to his, and that it is a movie that does not glorify violence or anything, and definitely Salo is a movie that people who like violence, who like gore and watching things that are gross, whatever, and they enjoy it, they are the ones that are going to watch Salo, right? People who hate violence, and in that case hate violent entertainment, would never watch Salo. Never, ever.
Yeah.
And you if you're a person who hates violence and is agrees with Haneke, oh, I hate violent entertainment, you read the synopsis of Funny Games, you're not gonna watch it. You're scrolling on your TV, you find it on Netflix, whatever. You are not going to click on it.
Yeah, but Haneke he's not a fool. Like he has to be very aware that that's what he's accomplishing, right? But I think that a personal hypocrisy makes some people misinterpret his work, which is really not what he's doing. You have to know that your work, your own work as an artist, your output goes a little beyond your intentions. And it's more like how is it received than it actually ends up being what it is. Because a lot of the things sound to me like he's kind of washing his hands out of the situation, trying to pretend that he's actually this moral crusader, he's a little bigger than life and bigger than all of them. That is not on the level of all those young people who do massive entertainment, but he's also in a way making entertainment, and he's making relatively massive films that are gonna be like huge festivals. He wins Oscars and Caesars and Felix Awards, and he wins a Palme d'Or. His films are not super art house, underground, underrated, like not known films. He's not like a Mariandora type of person. A part of him must be in some type of denial about the effect his films are actually having. I still love him, love Haneke, of course I do, but we're talking about his thematic consistency in what he's saying and what he's actually putting out.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think I hadn't thought about what you say about his audience. Like, his audience is not the people who are addicted to true crime, Marvel, Tarantino, or whatever, that they're not the ones that are like, oh, maybe I'm now gonna go watch a Haneke movie. He thinks they are the ones who should be watching his movies because his movies are a reaction to those blockbusters of the moment. So the blockbuster watchers, goers, they probably don't go beyond the super popular stuff, probably. Maybe the ones who really, really end up eagerly waiting for his films are people who either, as you say, want something that disturbs them in a different way. So people who do enjoy violence a lot and are like, oh, now I want a different type of violence. Or people who want to see things that are more art house, more experimental, like, oh, let's go watch this director who experiments with form, A person who stays in the blockbuster is not going to have the interest to see his films, even if they see that he wins the foreign language Oscar and they read the premise. Maybe it doesn't really awaken their interest. Maybe they start watching the first 20 minutes and they're like, no, this looks boring, because I'm sure most of his movies would seem boring at first, at least the first minutes, to people who are only used to blockbusters. So one solution that I think, could work would be for him to trick them with the marketing. That's the only thing I can think about. Like, for him to make trailers or posters that say like, come see the most violent and the funniest movie of the year, so the blockbuster fans are gonna rush to the theater and then have to confront themselves and their morals with what Haneke is going to show them. That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, that actually makes sense. Like, if his purpose is for these types of audiences to have like a shock with reality and confront his movies, he should actually be tricking them into getting into that cinema, because like that's not the target audience that should be seeing his films, and the ones that should are not, right? Well, maybe they are, but they're not like, they don't represent the big spectrum of people who consume his type of cinema, right? These are the cinema fans, the big critics, and people who watch a little more foreign language films. In any case, one interesting thing that he could do is what you say, right? Like kind of trick audiences into consuming and participating into his type of cinema, and then eventually like surprising them. In any case, I believe we have kind of proof that he does try to get these people to the cinema, because Funny Games was remade on 2004 in English with stars like Naomi Watts and Tim Roth, I believe. And he did this shot by shot remake because he thought that the people who should be watching that film were American audiences and in an American context. And he did that, but that version never got any traction. But the fact is he did. So it kind of tells you that he does want those people to watch the film, at least in his intentions. Maybe he's not the best distributor or marketing guy.
Okay, so let's now talk about the aesthetics versus morality issue on what should be more important, specifically in his films, because he often says that he does not want to tell people what to think. He says, I don't want to be like the other filmmakers who manipulate you and want to tell you very clearly what interpretation you should get from my film. He says, no, I don't want to manipulate you at all. I want to show you things without bias so that you can interpret for yourself and draw your own conclusions, that you, interpret them for yourself. For example, about his Glaciation trilogy, his first 3 movies, he says that he wanted to interrogate human actions, even the most shocking ones, without explaining them to the viewer, and thereby reducing them to anecdotes. The solution he found was a structural one, to resist all techniques conventionally used to psychologize, and simply to present the events of the story as directly as possible. The idea for The Seventh Continent began with an article in the newspaper about an event that he could not explain to himself. He says, I knew that I wanted to make some kind of film about it, that I wanted the audience to ask itself the same questions I had asked, and to struggle as I had done to find an answer. This is very interesting to me. I think that, there is also an argument that could be valid, and I don't know where I stand, but like if you are talking about a subject matter that is so disturbing that it can be interpreted in a bad way, such as a sadist can enjoy it, for example, if you're dealing with such a disturbing subject matter, maybe the morally correct thing to do would be to be clear with your intentions in the film, to avoid it to generating more harm than good. I mean, because we can have a purely aesthetic argument of art that it should not be like that, that it's cool that the director lets you draw your own conclusions, which I usually agree 90% of the times. But if we are talking about his argument here, his moral argument, like what would be the morally correct thing to say? I will make sure that my work is not going to generate more harm than good for some reason, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes the artist has a super good intention with what they write, but then in the end people end up misinterpreting it. I think that American Psycho and Fight Club are great examples of like satires of masculinity. The Wolf of Wall Street also. So many other movies that are satires of very toxic men, and then a lot of men ended up watching these films and ended up loving these characters, and they misinterpreted the movie, and then they end up worshipping these men. Maybe because the filmmaker was not clear enough, they ended up generating more damage to society. But I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, it's hypocritical to tell me that he's not trying to push his opinion onto others when he's clearly making these thesis statements about humanity. Definitely, more so than asking questions sometimes. So he's not so honest in that sense, but he does have this point created in his head where things are working by a certain way and everybody's feeling what he's intending them to feel, which is not the case, but he tells himself that. But ultimately the point is that his end product is very good, right? And it's a very good quality of film. And that's bottom line what matters, right? It doesn't matter if he's being honest with himself or not. It's just he's a great artist who's putting out some great art. Is it that, or I don't really understand what he's going to know how to aim for. But to me, it's a little self-delusion to believe that, but I don't mind, because like I said, the pieces of art that he ends up getting as a result are very good. In this review of Funny Games, there's this critic, Jay Hoberman, who writes, his movies are founded on the denial of catharsis, and to compound the creepiness, Haneke insists he's occupying the moral high ground. The wheel is rigged, so only Haneke can win. Which indeed, we have to remember he's originally a psychologist, so he's very aware of what types of tricks he's pulling, and he, of course, is using devices which are original, not conventions, but he's using devices to try to manipulate the audiences into reaching some emotional moments throughout his work, and then he knows how you're gonna feel about what comes next and what comes next. So he's always also preying on personal psychology in this general consciousness that we have. I don't think I find any point of conciliation between both arguments though. So I would only dare to say that I am a little more concerned about the aesthetic argument than the moral argument. So yeah, I would be a little more in the position of just leaving the work of art as is, and maybe the moral responsibility of the work of art, if somebody's gonna watch that and be like, "Ooh, let's let's say, I don't know, somebody watches Funny Games and decides to do the same thing they see on screen," that kind of moral responsibility you kind of have to put in the background, because it's not an extreme situation either. He's not putting on a snuff film. He's not making propaganda. It's just like a film that touches on strong material, and it has a lot more to lose as a piece of art than if we're thinking it's gonna be some excitement for sadists. And Haneke can try to be just as pure as he wants with his art, but when it comes down to it, he's a human being. He's not an AI or his when you write a script, you have to have a personal stance. It's ridiculous to think you don't have one, and it's gonna show. Especially when you do several films, it's gonna show some thread of who you are and what kind of interests you, and you will realize that it is, you study a little more, you find patterns, you find common themes, and you realize, okay, this is the way he goes. So it's impossible not to read into the person that's behind the works, and he probably had as an intention at the time of making the piece.
I hope so. Like I hope so. I hope that's the case. I think that, sometimes I worry that it's not obvious that people are or aren't reading your intention when we are talking about violent stuff. Of course, like, all the people who glorify the characters of Christian Bale and Brad Pitt in American Psycho Fight Club, who want to be like them, or Jordan Belfort. It's funny, like it's tragic, but it's also funny, But I think that for any other artist, I agree that unclear intentions don't bother me as much, and I am, more in favor of the aesthetic weight instead of the moral one, probably. I think that, for example, for me, one of the most fascinating debates in the literature department has been listening to people talk about Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I think that, some people think that Nabokov was a PDF file. I don't want to say the exact word, only because he wrote about one, and then others think that he actually did a great job in portraying how horrible a situation like that one is, right? So I think that works of art that are so divisive add so much to the conversation, and that's great. I think I love that we will never know the intention of the author and how productive these debates are without knowing the intention. I also love knowing intentions sometimes by watching interviews of authors, for example, like we've been doing, watching Haneke's interviews. Sometimes knowing that a work of art was made with the intention of educating a society in certain values, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, or to be political propaganda. Sometimes it is really amazing to learn these things, Yes. Anyway, this particular filmmaker, Michael Haneke, is someone who keeps talking about morality, being responsible. He keeps using the word responsibility in all his interviews. So is it or is it not responsible or irresponsible to be completely unbiased and just show violent events? I don't know. I think why would art be the only thing that gets a free pass on morality? Not only in its impact in real life, in that it may harm society more than benefit it, but under that reasoning, we could also, defend atrocities committed in the production of art, such as directors traumatizing their actors, or, architects who used slaves to create, architectural works of art. I don't know. I am in favor of free speech, though, and I think that the cool thing about art is that it is a space to ask uncomfortable questions, like you were saying, and to make us feel uncomfortable experiences and uncomfortable feelings. So I don't know where I stand. I just think that if he in particular wants to be Mr. Moral, maybe being unbiased is not quite in line with his philosophy. I don't know. But also, his favorite World War II documentary is Night and Fog, because it shows you the atrocities without any kind of manipulation, right? It just shows you the images, and then you draw your own conclusions. I guess that's why he likes it so much. I was also thinking about a documentary that I told you some months ago about this woman. It's called Love Has Won on Max, about a woman who thought she was Jesus Christ, and she had cult followers who were interviewed in this documentary after she died. That's no spoiler. It happens in the first minute of the documentary. They still think to this day that she was the reincarnation of Jesus. And if these cult members watch the documentary, they will watch it with pride, and they will be, oh, this is so cool because it is us telling our story, and, the people who are in them, the rest of the audience, are probably going to laugh. It is honestly kind of funny seeing a lot of people saying, oh, I think this random woman is both the reincarnation of Robin Williams and Jesus Christ and Elvis Presley. Like, a lot of these random celebrities but they're gonna see it, they're gonna be part of it, you know. And I like that. I liked that a lot when I was watching that documentary. I thought that it was a very, you know, fresh way of doing these kind of like true crime documentaries. I liked the distance of the filmmakers there, but I also thought maybe it could have been cool if at some point the filmmakers brought in a psychiatrist and said, you know, this woman clearly has schizophrenia or another mental illness that is similar to it, you know, because I think that this is a clear example of the problem that the United States has with the mental health crisis and with the drug crisis as well, because these people were 24/7, very, very, very high. And so I don't know, do these things create more harm than good? I don't know. On the other hand, I was also wondering what would Haneke think about the documentary The Act of Killing by Joshua Oppenheimer, which seems similar to me as this other documentary Love Has Won, in that, you know, the murderers are interviewed in The Act of Killing, and they are very proud of the genocide that they have committed, and they say we are heroes, and they're going to watch the documentary, they're going to be very, very proud of themselves, right? But then Joshua Oppenheimer decides to end the film with the main character throwing up, right? That's the last scene, which obviously means that he cannot deal with his past, and his body cannot deal with his past and with his guilt. His body rejects it, you know. Joshua Oppenheimer, the only thing that he did was, okay, I'm gonna end it here, like, and that's the moral of the story, because he decided to end the documentary here. I think that intervention of him as an artist, you already bias your work there. It's already biased by making that the last scene, right? But it made the documentary so amazing and so powerful, you know. So I think that, I don't know if Haneke considers his work to be moral and or like a morality mission, like the Criterion piece there, they say like it's almost a religious mission, his work, Haneke's work. It's like a moral purpose that he has. Maybe he should be more on the nose, I don't know. But then again, some minutes ago we mentioned that he feels he has a responsibility to art. I thought he was probably going to say that he has a responsibility to humanity or to peace, or to nonviolence. So I don't know if that is why. What do you think?
Yeah, about the act of killing thing, he would probably love the psychological experiment of the act of killing, in which we place these people on these situations where they have to confront the guilt. But I don't know if he would be the biggest fan of it being a documentary, because then it would be like us intruding on a very deep and personal thing, which is bordering on non-fiction, right? That there's a reason why he's never ever done a documentary himself. He just does fiction pieces because he needs to be as far away removed from real violence, which actually deeply affects him, and he said so several times. He does not feel comfortable watching violence in real life. That's why he tries to, in his films, show you how uncomfortable it can be to watch violence on film, and he feels horrible about people enjoying violence on film. That's like his go-to brand as a director. Most his films are all based around watching the most horrible things humanity can endure. Even stuff like Amor, that movie is terrible to watch. You suffer throughout the whole movie watching this, like thinking it's you yourself at the end of your life with your partner or maybe your grandparents. It's a horrible thing to empathize with, but he kind of takes you there. So I don't know, he's a mystery to me in this sense.
So lately I've been reading a lot about the psychological impact of fiction and narrative on people. And stay tuned because I'm preparing a long essay about it. But it's crazy, like the evidence that we see, for example, in Britain, there is a study that demonstrated that girls who watch more reality TV often say that being mean and telling lies is necessary to get ahead in life. So it's crazy. Sometimes it's not propaganda, but it can be something that is kind of subconscious, you know. So I don't know if we might be falling in some kind of fanaticism where we value art more than real people in real life. So I don't know. I would love to see more research, more psychological and sociological research about this topic. And if there is more research done and it shows us that violent art does affect people negatively, both individually and as a society, would we change our mind? You know, like in general, people who see art this way, maybe if there is more conclusive research, we would change our minds, probably, you know. But then again, I've always believed in like free speech in arts, because they're the one place where we can challenge the views that we already have. I like what Lin-Manuel Miranda says in an interview, like in art we can be effing nuts. He says like we can be thieves, we can be cheaters, we can be killers, whatever you want for an hour or two, you know. Like that's the cool thing about art, you know. So I don't know where I stand. Like please let us know your thoughts, everyone. It's complicated, like authorial intention. I don't want to get into the whole death of the author debate here, which I usually endorse. But I've had reflections while watching his films that he would hate, that I'm thinking these things. Like, for example, when I was watching Funny Games, I spent the whole movie thinking, okay, what's the only solution if I have two random men in my house? We're in the middle of nowhere. The only solution for me would be to shoot them, right? To grab a gun and shoot them. Also, they didn't have a cell phone there. So, like, that's the only thing, you know? I was watching it with an American friend and she was telling me, well, this is the reason why Americans have guns in their homes, right? And I was thinking, okay, maybe it's kind of counterproductive that myself and many more people are probably going to have this thought while watching the movie, which is a thought that is probably generating more violence in real life, you know, because also the movie would have been solved like halfway through. The kid finds a gun and he tries to shoot this guy who looks like Antonio Banderas / Matty Healy. He looks like him, right? If he had bullets in that gun, the movie would have been over, the family would have been saved. So Haneke kind of also shows us that. So what lesson can some folks take away? That I need a gun and I need to make sure it's always loaded. I think a lot of people can take that lesson after watching Funny Games, you know. So that's what I mean. Sometimes things can be a bit counterproductive and he can end up generating more violence, right?
Yeah, I guess the whole point is he cannot concern himself with that as an artist, right? He's trying to really put out some pieces. They're gonna have thematic elements which are gonna be interpreted in as many ways as it can, and his works are very open to interpretation. So as close as he would want them to be, several people are going to interpret several things which he has absolutely no control over, right? Especially because he kind of wants to play the audiences constantly when they're watching the film. And he sees, okay, you're going to feel this now, and then you're going to feel this other thing, and then I'm going to add this scene, and it's going to generate this feeling. Because he's a psychologist, like I say. He thinks he has like this complete puppet master control over his audiences, and when he does not, that's of course gonna crash with his themes. I think he's playing a losing battle when he's trying to be like this moral police or play himself in this moral high ground, like what we were saying, that he talks a lot about moral responsibility on his interviews. That's a losing battle. He will never be morality's speaker or the mayor of Moralville. It's just like he's gonna do films which are gonna have some impact in some people's lives and some different impact in other people's life, and it is what it is. He cannot pretend to control audiences, because that would be I think it would diminish his works, and the plurality of possible meanings and interpretations actually enriches the play. Bottom line, he cannot focus on whatever people are gonna think when people see his films, and if it does not match his philosophy, well, sucks on them and sucks on Haneke, I guess, because he cares about that.
I agree that the cool thing about art is, you know, having these debates and like all the different takeaways that and interpretations that we can all have from the same work. I think that's one of the coolest things about arts, definitely. Now, what do you think about this? We both like Ingmar Bergman. Isabel Huppert compares Haneke with Ingmar Bergman. And so does the Criterion collection. They say that, like Bergman, especially in Bergman's God's Silence period, Haneke is intensely concerned with the lies we tell ourselves in order to live, and with the reality, however frightening, that those lies serve to conceal. As with Bergman, this sense of urgency of higher purpose can lend his work an almost missionary starkness. No one makes The Seventh Continent or Funny Games, White Ribbon, or even Amour, like I quoted before, unless they feel a moral imperative to do so. These films are difficult to watch, at times nearly unbearable, precisely because of the emotions that they trigger. What do you think about this comparison with Bergman?
I do very much see the comparison with Ingmar Bergman because in the end, Bergman, just like Haneke, I think they were both trying to make a very particular kind of film. If I have to choose a genre for them, I would say it comes closest to a horror film, but they also have a lot of elements of the psychological, thriller, and sociological elements too. Now, Bergman has always been focused on concepts of psychology and psychoanalysis, and he very much implemented it in his films, right? Like the psyche, the subconscious, the self, the ego, superego, archetypes, collective consciousness, whatever. Like the psychology, but that was a psychology that was accessible to Bergman, like back in the 20th century, like from the 40s to the 80s, I think. In, I mean, but always from this humanistic theatrical side, right? Very much like the theater. Like the most Bergman thing you can have is somebody like pulling up the curtains from the theater to reveal the troupe of actors. That's just the most Bergman element, like showing you the behind the scenes of how we put on what we call a show or entertainment or a spectacle or whatever. Haneke is also arriving, but in a different generation. So Haneke is like a psychologist first and then a filmmaker. He comes from a different school, and the topics or concepts of psychology that he has had accessible are evidently different than the ones Bergman had. Clearly, the studies of human sciences have evolved a lot, and now we have many much more branches, many more concepts, angles from which to understand the human experience, like sociology or anthropology. As Bergman knew, it is very different than what we have now in the 21st century. His films, they are new. Like there's this Haneke film that's called Code Unknown. It's dealing with how people's psyche is affected by migratory processes in Europe. And the film is very much about different people coexisting in different societal places, but occupying the same physical space. And for instance, refugees, or the change in the visual panorama, the accumulation of, or let's say, but even better, the acculturation of a whole migratory group that now coexists with you. It's a change, and that change, it's changing things for everybody on every scale of whatever they find themselves in the hierarchy of their place. And it is something that, for example, that did not concern Bergman very much, who is a Swede from like the 60s, 70s. That's why they're kind of living together but in different periods. Yes, the approach does go that way, but I would say that out of everybody who's working right now, like on cinema, he's probably the one who resembles Bergman the most. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
And okay, this is a quote that he said in one of his documentaries. What do you think about this quote? He says, "In cinema, the viewer is always the director's victim. The only thing you can do is to refer within a work to the fictional character of the work itself."
I think what he's trying to say is watching the audience as a victim is very much in line with him, because like I told you, he does feel like he's in control of your emotions or your psyche for the duration of his film, let's say 2 hours. The only thing that can solve or bring any healing to whatever you've seen that has already generated pain in you. It's something else he could put in there, but nothing that happens in the outside world will ever uh, make it right for, I don't know, that woman who got her family murdered. Like, there's nothing outside that could help her. It's only what Haneke puts in.
Right. Yeah. And I think that he must not be very happy with the technological advances that are making the entertainment industry to head in a direction opposite of what he stands for. For example, like 2 weeks ago, I watched Twisters in 4DX. So the seats were moving like we were in the Twister, and we had the wind in our faces. We had water. Yeah,
He
we
would
had
hate that.
water falling on
would
us.
hate that.
The whole experience, right? And the entire movie, I was thinking like, wow, he hates this, right? He must hate this. Like, not only the movie has violence as entertainment, but also it is kind of messed up about how it's about this group of people who are having this rush and excitement and adrenaline from chasing tornadoes, but that really there is a lot of people who are dying or losing their houses due to those same tornadoes. And they talk about this in the movie, and they acknowledge this in the movie. And the protagonist, her life purpose is to save people from these tornadoes, but she also loves them. So there's a quote where she says like, the worse the weather, the happier I am. She says something like that. So you, the audience, are having fun in these scenes where they are chasing the tornadoes and you have the wind in your face and your seat is jumping up and down. The whole theater was laughing. Like, we were laughing so hard, you know? So, of course, the form is manipulating us more and more into enjoying violence. So I laughed even harder when the credits rolled up and I saw that the executive producer was Steven Spielberg. So I was like, okay, now Haneke must hate this even more, you know? Of course, I guess he must hate violent video games much more. He would faint if he played some kind of POV shooting video game with a VR headset. You know, it's like technology is making the consumption of violent entertainment to go completely in the opposite way of where he wants it to go. And finally, I think another thing that I take away from him is that many artists only break conventions for the sake of breaking them and for the sake of being cool or being different. But conventions in storytelling are usually there because they are formulas that work. And if you break them, it has to be in accordance with the message that you want to give, right? So I think he is an example of someone who does this successfully. So, well, it is true that it is impossible for all of us to hate his films and to want to turn them off because there will always be sadists. His attempt in form does strike me as relatively successful because these long takes, static, lack of music, screwing with your narrative expectations, they are in accordance with his philosophy about violence. So our question to the audience is, does Haneke really succeed in the form? That is, does he really succeed in capturing his philosophy in his form? This is a question for more of the true connoisseurs in form. Like, do you think his long static shots, the anticlimax, lack of catharsis, etc., are well used in his movies? Well, as in, are they really achieving what he preaches? Also, he talks a lot about how sometimes not showing something can even be more disturbing than actually showing it. So isn't this also kind of a trick to manipulate the viewer, just like what the filmmakers he criticizes do? Well, he actually says if you use tricks, you have to make them visible, right? So this is obvious in Funny Games, which is so on the nose with the remote and the guy who, again, looks like Antonio Banderas, breaking the fourth wall and spelling things out to you.
Wir sind doch noch unter Spielfilmlänge. Ist sie schon genug? Sie wollen doch ein richtiges Ende mit plausibler Entwicklung, oder?
I think he's as successful as he can, like, given the thing, but I think, like I said, he's fighting some losing battle because bottom line, he will never not use devices to try to get his audiences engaged to the film, right? And the violence he will put out on display will be exciting to somebody. So there's just no winning side to what he's planning on. That's why in any case the conversation can go more around the place that where this place that morality can have on art, especially with such a moralistic director like Haneke, that in his interviews he's always preaching about how he finds other types of art like offensive or irresponsible.
Right.
In the end, I think the question goes a little more in that direction.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to us. And this is basically, these are our thoughts. And we want to hear your thoughts too, because as you can see, we like him very much, but there are things about him that we find contradictory. But maybe you all have different views that can help us also understand him better, or just see him in a different light or through a different perspective. So we are ready to listen to all of you. So yes, thank you very much.